I'm Miss Moon, and this is my Francophone Project. If you didn't know that I was Miss Moon, then you are probably a teacher or a classmate of mine, in which case, I'm sorry. Long story short, I make videos on YouTube, and I kinda asked if I could make my presentation a video, and the answer was, I mean, as long as you can present it, yeah. So, thank you. For those of you who are not classmates or a teacher, I'm doing a Francophone project, because we have to do that for class, and my project is about the great city of Quebec.
Okay, can I just talk for 5 seconds about how Quebec has the capital city being Quebec? Quebec City is the capital of Quebec Province. It's genius. Like, why is New York not the capital of New York? Why? Okay, mini rant over. Moving on.
A big part of the presentation is basically conveying a general knowledge of the country, like the country's location,
America's hat.
the country's population,
Roughly 540,994.
maybe the language of the country,
Mostly French, but also Anglais.
and we also need to have a brief history and plan a trip there. I'm gonna go ahead really quickly and give you the history. Here it comes, a brief history. My key focus here is going to be the important dates that laid the groundwork for Quebec's history, and I'm going to try and be as concise as possible. Early exploration of the West was basically around the end of the 1400s, yeah? Quebec in the 1400s, it wasn't a thing.
It just didn't exist. I mean, except to the indigenous people who lived there.
The 1500s become slightly more important, but that's only because that's when France starts to get their exploring on. I'm gonna go ahead and phase forward to the 1700s because that is when we deal with New France. Quebec existed, it just wasn't in the capacity that we know it today. It was a part of New France. The old world empires, they had a lot of claims on the New World. England had a relatively small amount of land for its very plentiful colonists. But France had this enormous territory that ranged all the way from Louisiana up into Canada. And there were very few French colonists in this enormous territory. Again, we're gonna shift focus into the 1750s and 60s because that is the advent of the 7-Year War. Yes, it is technically a world war, but it's actually Britain versus France.
You got that reference? 10 points to whichever house you're in.
Any world history course that you take is probably going to impart to you that England and France will engage in anything, whether it's an all-out war to a slap fight, just to try to blacken the other one's eye. Spoilers, in this case, it didn't end well for fair France. Okay, so political climate change. New France is gone, and Quebec now belongs to the English Empire.
It's so weird to say.
Big shout out to General James Murray, who was made governor of Quebec. He was an Englishman, but he far preferred the actual French Canadian. Unfortunately, he was tasked with assimilating the French, and his major response to this was, nah. That's paraphrasing, of course. In fact, he said, how in God's name am I supposed to assimilate the French when they represent 99% of the population and the English only represent 1%? Besides, the French are a most noble people, and Quebec must remain populated by the French until the end of time.
It's a bit dramatic, but good man, Murray.
Again, shifting focus because we're going to another key date, which is 1774, and the Quebec Act. This was the British government's attempt to shore up Quebec. They were going to revamp the government a little bit, and they were going to expand Quebec and give them religious freedom. This was not well loved by the American colonists.
You mean Quebec extends all the way down to the Ohio Valley and they get to be Catholic?
As we know, in this time period, tensions were brewing, and so cue the American Revolution! We were in it to win it until 1783, and then the Peace of Paris defined the United States borders a lot more clearly. Next, and the last important date and people on this list, it's going to be 1848 and responsible government. You can't focus on responsible government without talking about Louis LaFontaine and Robert Baldwin. The Responsible Government Act essentially put the power of governing the province into the hands of the locals, so they didn't have to wait so much on word from the British Empire to do the things that they needed to do. Louis LaFontaine was the first local prime minister, and Robert Baldwin was elected deputy. And this is all the history that I'm going to be giving you at once. I'm sorry, and you're welcome. I ramble a lot. The road trip project was a bit of a rabbit hole sort of exercise. I don't really do a lot of traveling, and I mean, what do I know about traveling in Canada? I don't know anything about Canada, really. I mean, unless we're talking about the Hetalia character, and then I'm good. But like any other project, I looked to the internet. According to Google Maps, Quebec is about 24 hours away from here, but that's straight driving and no rest breaks, which sounds like torture. One thing that I did was go to Road Trippers. I don't mean this to be an endorsement, but seriously, if you're planning a trip, I heavily suggest Road Trippers. They even have a handy app. One thing that they do is they show you a route to go, and along that route you can get like a 30-mile radius of interesting things to see. If you are interested in hotels, sites, food, whatever, you can use Road Trippers and you can figure out things to see along the way as well as in your destination. Of course, for the purposes of this, I have to forget that I'm an out-of-shape comic book, fantasy, sci-fi gamer nerd, and that I'd actually want to travel and go out and do things instead of staying indoors and playing Star Wars: The Old Republic, which I'd much rather be doing right now, probably. Let's just say that I'm going to be staying in Quebec for 14 days.
Because nobody said this project had to be realistic.
I hope I don't butcher the pronunciation of any of these things, but where would I like to be staying? Well, this is a fantasy, so I would love to be staying at Le Manor du Lac de Lange. It's a lovely hotel and spa that overlooks the Lac de Lange. Now that that's covered, the things that I would want to actually do in Quebec, they pretty much revolve around eating and taking photos. So really being touristy. There's a National Museum of Fine Arts that's interesting. There's also Fairmont-le-Château Frontenac, which is a beautiful hotel resort. I don't really know. Technically, I'd like to go there, but I'm not sure if I should just go up the front or apply for a job at the stables. But it's a beautiful, picturesque, castle-like hotel that's only a few minutes walk away from many of the major attractions around it. Even though in this I'm taking in imaginary money, I probably couldn't stay there. I'm a broke college student. I'd love to see the Montmorency Falls. They're taller than Niagara Falls, and from what I understand, in winter they freeze and the lake freezes and there's a huge snow mound that people climb up and they can get a really great shot. There's also people that climb the ice, but let's face it, that would not happen for me. As for food, I mean, there's so many different places. I know the restaurant table is probably way too posh for me, but this is my dream vacay, man. I can go anywhere I want, right? I can picture it. It's right across the street from the Église Saint-Roch, which is this really beautiful cathedral. I picture myself sitting there in the restaurant table in a really posh outfit, sipping something exotic, being able to see the cathedral across from Tom Hiddleston.
Ooh la la.
That would be my fantasy vacay. Am I done? Am I done? You have no idea how done I am. Thanks for coming along with me for this ride and listening to me ramble about Quebec. Now I'm gonna go play Star Wars: The Old Republic and try to forget that there's an election on. A plus!